Next, from Rend Lake College in Ina, we hear what fracking and horizontal drilling have done to transform the oil and gas industry of Ohio. This address is delivered by Tom Stewart of the Ohio Oil and Gas Association, who discusses how fracking has revolutionized the amount of oil and gas that can be recovered. This runs about 25 minutes.
Ohio is a very old oil and gas producing state. We've been producing oil and gas in this state since commercial production began. Over 260,000 wells have been drilled in Ohio in all quadrants of the state, but because of geology, the modern era has been primarily focused on the eastern side, which is where the Utica Shale is at. About 60,000 wells are still producing in the state of Ohio, drilling about 1,000 a year. We have many horizons up and down the geologic column from which we can find and produce oil and gas. The very shallow stuff was done right after Colonel Drake's well, but our mainstay is our Clinton Sand Formation right about here. Above the Clinton Sand Formation, it's unfortunately the green is not showing, is the Marcellus Shale, and below it is the Utica Shale. Both source rocks, both very much in the news these days as far as resource shale play. This is our history, going back to about 1880. Our first production was actually 1860, but 1880 is when they really started keeping track of records. In this area right here is, we were drilling over 6,500 wells in the Lima Finley field in northwestern Ohio. That's where John D. Rockefeller got his first start in oil and gas, not in refining or transportation. That was the largest producing oil field in the United States in 1885. And then in 1890, right here, where you see this big dip down, Spindletop was drilled in East Texas field. After that, we sort of languished as these were very tight formations, and they're not like these wonderful formations you have here in Illinois that have great porosity and permeability and flow on our own. Ours are very tight. We have good porosity, but poor permeability, and we had to always stimulate them. Back in my grandfather's day, they stimulated them by dropping nitroglycerin down wells, which was a very poor way to have a career choice. It didn't work out well, and people died doing that. After World War II, most people thought Ohio was done until 1947, as your state's geologist pointed out. Halliburton invented the process called hydraulic fracturing. That came to the state of Ohio in 1953, and you can see what happened right after that. Exponential growth leading up into the tight sands era of the 70s and 80s of the expansion of the Clinton sandstone, which must be hydraulically fractured in order to produce. What has changed today? A lot of, we call this a fracking conference, and there's a lot of concentration on the word on hydraulic fracturing. In my view, hydraulic fracturing is ancient technology. Bill is right. When I was a baby, a little young man, we lived right here in Mount Vernon, and my father was working for some oil and gas concerns here. Halliburton told him about hydraulic fracturing, and they moved back to Ohio to chase the Clinton sand because of hydraulic fracturing. So my life has been defined by the process, and I'm nearly 62 years old. What's really changed is this concept of horizontal laterals and the ability to go into resource shales instead of conventional formations or traps where we have found oil and gas. That's the game changer. And the game changer is found in shale. Here's a slide that came from Time magazine several years ago, and when people really started picking up on the potential of this play, and it is spread across the nation, certainly in the Appalachians, it's been our experience. You're starting to see shale plays crop up everywhere. The granddaddy is the Barnett in North Texas, and I know more than a few people in the room are interested in the Bakken Shale up in the Dakotas and Montana area, which has just revolutionized oil production here in the United States. Over in my end of the country, it's the Marcellus Shale of Pennsylvania, New York, and West Virginia, Pennsylvania being the main beneficiary, New York having great potential, but they decided to ban their potential and go to sleep. Over in my state, there's just a little bit of Marcellus activity going on, but the real thing is the Utica. How is this opportunity shaping up for us? I sort of give you my perspectives as an industry advocate and how I approach this. I don't see differences between conventional and non-conventional, or shale or non-shale, or deep versus shallow. I see the oil and gas exploration and production industry. This is just one more step in the evolution of technology opening up opportunities. In Ohio, those major opportunities are providing for a major expansion of the proven reserve base. In a state that's one of the oldest producing states in the nation, if not the world, we are now ready and set to do a major expansion on proven reserve base. And this is really happening because of source rocks. Up until this time, here in Illinois, or just about any other basin across the United States, mine included, we always looked for where oil and gas had been trapped, where it had migrated from source rocks, yours being the New Albany Shale, mine being the Utica, in some cases the Marcellus, and had migrated in a relentless search to the surface, oil seeps. The first Drake well was drilled on oil seeps. Santa Barbara oil field drilled on oil seeps. Relentlessly trying to get to the surface, but then stopped because it encountered a reservoir that could contain the oil and gas, and for which above it was an impermeable barrier, ours being the Packer Shale over the Clinton, that would not allow the oil and gas to move any further. That's where we've always looked to find oil and gas. That is the history of Illinois, and certainly the history of my state. Here's what's changed. We're now bypassing the traps and going to the source rocks, where oil and gas has been formed by Mother Nature over the eons, and actually drilling in the kitchen of oil and gas. That's changing everything. Most geologists believe that 95% of the oil and gas remains in place in the source rocks even after feeding all the oil and gas traps that have produced all the oil and gas over the last 150 years. If you stop and think about that concept, that is a major game changer in how we think about oil and gas resources, reliable and efficient energy, peak oil, our dependence upon foreign relations, our dependence upon Middle East, Venezuela, or whoever. Everything has changed for America because of technology and the ability to horizontally drill through a very difficult, tight, hard rock such as shale. In my state, it's the Utica Shale that's the real potential. This is the map of the Utica. It covers most of the state. It's deepest in southwestern Pennsylvania, where you see that orange spot. That's 15,000 feet. And thermogenically, it's very, very old there. So you get if you get a product, it's going to be very dry gas. But that play is really not working. You have to move up dip into the basin to get to thermal maturity that will allow for wet natural gas. And this is how it plays out in the state of Ohio. There is this fairway that begins, and here's where the Illinois folks were last week. They were here in Guernsey County, Harrison, and up in Carroll County. Carroll County is Chesapeake's playground. They're the largest driller shale in the state of Ohio. And we have about a 6 to 7 county area, 2 to 3 townships wide, coming down from Columbiana County, and hopefully soon tailing out in Washington County, where we're getting really good wells. If you go to the east of this, you're moving down into the Appalachian Basin at a rate of about 75 foot a mile. As you go down, dip into the basin, the thermal maturity gets older, the gas turns dry, getting great natural gas wells, but it's 1,000 BTU pipeline quality gas, and right now the market isn't very favorable for that commodity because there's just too much of it. As you move into the fairway window, the thermal maturity gets younger. We're now getting wet natural gas, which is a huge game changer for the state of Ohio. Now we're getting into natural gas that floats between 1,100 BTU and 1,350 BTU. The constituents that make that BTU difference up in the natural gas are propane, butanes, isoputanes, ethylene, not ethanol, ethylene, and that is what people make plastics out of and all that. So there's a lot of products to be harvested from this gas. As you continue to move west, heading into the heart of the oil field in the state of Ohio, we get a thing called the volatile crude oil window, in which we're picking up high condensate wells that may flow a couple thousand barrels a day of condensate, 60, 70 degree oil, virtually straight run gasoline, very, very hot stuff. And then the hope for Ohio, which is the big, big question for us, and which I think is going to be the big, big question for Illinois, is will this turn into actual crude oil play as you move up, dip into the basin, get shallower? This is a big question. Devon came in and leased a whole lot of wells over on the western side of the play, but it's very shallow, and they did not succeed. They drilled essentially dry holes. They've left the state of Ohio because you're getting into the 3,000 to 4,000 foot range and trying to get a very long hydrocarbon molecule such as crude to move through with that kind of bottom hole pressure because it's shallow has not been successful to date. Here's how our play looks. This is the most recent map just at the end of June, and how it shapes up across the state of Ohio. You can see how that fairway is really shaping up on drilling activity, with Carroll County and Harrison and Belmont being the real heart of the play. This is initial production rates on wells reported with the 2012 production. The bigger the circle, the better the well. If it's green, it's producing crude oil, or at least portion crude oil, but mostly you're seeing that it's brown, and that's natural gas. This is primarily a natural gas play with the hopes that it's wet natural gas to be able to harvest off those natural gas liquids, get liquids uplift to add it to the price of your natural gas, and then hopefully, if technology improves, and that's one thing this industry is very good at, opening up that crude window. Here's another thing that's happened to this. This map's not really showing up too well. There's a very complex, well-developed gathering system for natural gas. Ohio's weighted about 70% natural gas, 30% crude oil. That's our historic mix of products from combination wells in the state of Ohio. Because of that, a very complex system of gathering lines has been built up over the last 100 years, primarily by companies such as Columbia Gas Transmission and Dominion. Dominion operates the oldest natural gas utility in the country, East Ohio, and they have made a 100-year history of gathering natural gas in our state. But those systems are not capable of handling the kind of this class of production coming from these wells, and so these companies are coming into the state of Ohio and building Utica-specific gathering systems, processing, fractionization, cryogenics to manage the liquids uplift above 1,000 BTU gas. And when we were out on this tour last week, when we were at that rig, we went around the back side of that drilling rig, and there was Mark West installing gathering lines to interconnect two wells, one being the well that's being drilled, and you saw in that picture. This is not the gathering lines that my father built, because these were 8-inch coated pipe going up and down the hills of eastern Ohio. That's very, very large pipe. And then we ended up going to Mark West's facility that's going to be processing that gas. It was like going to a refining operation, very sophisticated operations trying to gather value. What's in it for Ohio? That's a question that the public has been asking itself now for the last 4 years. The government has been asking itself for the last 4 years, legislators, industry, you name it. What's really in it for the state of Ohio, and how does Ohio benefit? And I assume that's the reason that 300 people are here today. The state's geologists said on a quantitative analysis, possibly 5 billion barrels of oil, possibly 15 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. An astronomical number on quantitative analysis. He was recently taken to task for saying that because they tried to make that sound like it was proven reserves. That was quantitative analysis, had nothing to do with proven reserves. Natural gas being sold in the Appalachian Basin at a steep discount. In the market, we're in its normal range. Natural gas should trade on a ratio of 6 to 1 to crude oil. It's now traveling up into the 40 to 1 area. That's the reason that the petrochemical and chemical industry wants to re-enter the United States to get hyper-competitive pricing for their basic feedstocks, and they want to come back and harvest that pricing and create jobs. Ohioans are literally saving billions in natural gas, in their natural gas bills. If you're a homeowner, commercial concern, or even more importantly, if you're an industrial concern, you're saving huge amounts of money because the natural gas, one, is being produced in your backyard, and two, you're getting it at a discount that nowhere else in the world you can find that kind of thing. possibly 200,000 jobs. IHS Global said 34,000 jobs to date, possibly 200,000 over the next 15 years. $34 billion of investment so far. Eastern Ohio, which is the heart of Appalachia, economic rejuvenation that they haven't experienced or hope to experience over the last 40 years. $2.75 billion in industrial investment above and beyond the E&P process. But most importantly, and probably because I'm from the oil and gas industry, it is the expansion of the proven reserve base and what that means for the state of Ohio and its citizens. IHS, as I said, 38,830 jobs by the end of last year have been linked to the shale industry in the state of Ohio. I know of no other industry that's done that for the state of Ohio to date, no other that can make that claim. Ohio is now among the top 10 producing states. The shale industry is already paying in excess of $910 million in taxation on the existing tax base. Youngstown, if you go up to Youngstown, which is an old Rust Belt steel manufacturing city, it's like walking back into the 1940s. You expect to see guys walking around in fedora hats and double-breasted suits. That's because nothing has happened in Youngstown until a French company, V&M Star, came in and rebuilt the steel mills that had been deteriorating in Youngstown in order to manufacture oil field seamless tubulars to service the shale industry in Appalachia. Youngstown now has one of the highest economic growth ratios going on anywhere in the state of Ohio. You see this happening up and down that fairway that I showed you. Carroll County, huge increase in sales tax receipts. Monroe County, if you go down to southeastern Ohio, a county that has had no economic activity, nothing happened, 23% increase in sales tax receipts. What's in it for the United States? This is the changer that we all need to think about because it's everything that we've been dreaming about for a long time. If you look at the most recent proven reserve report that's come from the Department of Energy's Energy Information Administration, they publish it on an annual basis, it will show that for the first time, U.S. oil and natural gas rose by the highest amounts ever recorded since they started recording proven reserves going back clear into the 70s. They attribute this to one thing, horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing in the resource shale play. And even the Wall Street Journal recently said that the U.S. may overtake Saudi Arabia in oil production. And if you look at Market Watch Wall Street Journal yesterday, the Saudi oil minister said that he fears for his country's ability to, one, maintain their production capacity, and two, continue sales necessary for the subsidization of their country because 90% of their revenues come from crude oil production. This threatens OPEC countries, and I feel absolutely terrible about it. What could limit this opportunity? I am an industry advocate. You need to know that going into it, so I see it from a certain perspective. Opposition that's often based upon unreasonable expectations or unreasonable explanations of what's going on. All you have to do is go to New York. If you live on the New York border and look across the state of Pennsylvania, all the landowners there and all the businesses are grinding their teeth because they can't get to the same opportunity as somebody just across the border is doing. Reactionary oil and gas policy. We see that happening on a national level. You've seen it happen in my state. You see it happen everywhere. We need to build public policy based upon real needs, real science, and quit this idea that we're trying to make people happy. That's not the reason to create law. And then, of course, adverse tax policy. You just went through this debate. We're going through this debate in a very difficult way in the state of Ohio. My belief is that the gross net revenues from oil and gas ought to be plowed back into the ground to create more opportunity, and that's the best way to use these revenues. Considerations for you to think about. Keep your expectations under control. When this whole thing started about 4 years ago, we were all talking about clear across the state of Ohio. We now realize that it's really 6 to 7 counties where this activity is going to happen, and even that we don't fully understand. So there was too much hyperbole in the press, coming from industry, coming from government, coming from the media, about what this really means. We're just now beginning to draw that back into line, which is something that I really urge you to think about. Oil and gas is all about drilling a hole in the ground and testing a reservoir in order to understand what you have and understand whether you have a reserve. Let that happen first before you decide that, how this is all going to impact your communities. We have to understand the industry. What is hydraulic fracturing anyways? And your state's geologist, that was an outstanding PowerPoint presentation that really did well to explain this whole process to you. I'd like to get a copy of that. But the reason I changed my title slide is that this was called a fracking conference, and it's really a conference about shale. As your geologist told you, fracking is essentially a one-day process, and then we're done. This is not about hydraulic fracturing. This is about expanding the oil and gas reserve base in your state. So we need to understand the realities of resource shale development. And there's a lot of it that's different than what you're used to here with the conventional industry. And speaking of the conventional industry, and there's people from the industry here in this room, you need to keep them in your thoughts. In the state of Ohio, there's been, as I said, constant and vibrant industry that's been going on for years. But right now they're in hibernation because there's been so much natural gas found that the natural gas prices are depressed beyond what anybody believed they would be just 5 years ago. So if you even have a prospect to drill in the state of Ohio to a conventional formation, you usually can't make the economics work at this kind of natural gas price. But even if you did, you can't afford the services and the equipment necessary because the shale play demands so much resources. So oil field services, pressure pumping, fracturing, cementing, testing, all of that, very expensive. Oil field tubulars, very expensive. So even if you did have a prospect, you can't afford to drill it. But even if you could afford to drill it, and even if you can make the process work economically, go to the landowner in the state of Ohio and say, I want to drill a Clinton well on your land. He says, $5,000 an acre. Well, I'm willing to give you 20 because that's all the prospect will bear. That's nice. I'll take $5,000 an acre. Anywhere you go in the state of Ohio now, all landowners believe that their acreage, which was once priced in the $20 to $25 range for a good prospect, now is worth $5,000 an acre. So even if you can make the economics work, even if you can afford the oil field services and goods, you can't afford to get the acreage. And this has been very, very hard on my conventional members. The same may very well play out here in the state of Illinois. Getting along with companies, and I think you're going to get a presentation on this in the day. The most remarkable statement I heard last week from the Carroll County Commissioners was they said, in working, this is where the most intense activity is taking place, they said if you go and work with these companies, you will find that they will bend over backwards to accommodate you. They want to be your neighbor. If you try to cram it down their throat or legislate them, they will fight you to the death. And there was nothing that I thought was more poignant than what that statement was made. So keep that in mind as well. And there is a difference between environmentalists and anti-development. When you see industry advocates often stand up and talk about this stuff, we often say those environmentalists. I reject that concept. I know many of the people of the public interest in the environmental movement that are closely associated with oil and gas development, and I believe that they're looking for a better America as much as we are looking for a better America. And they'll work with you if you try to work with them. They want to be reasonable. They want to see opportunity happen in this country as much as anybody else. There is a difference between authentic environmentalism and anti-development crowd, and that's the people that I worry about. So, from an industry perspective, to my friends in the industry here, be on guard for trying to appease people that cannot be appeased. But support authentic collaboration. I'm associated with an organization nationally called Stronger, the State Review of Oil and Natural Gas Environmental Regulations. Stronger brings the environmental community, state regulators, industry together in a collaborative way to try to improve the regulatory environment, try to find out where there are gaps, make recommendations on how to close those gaps. Otherwise, you're taking three parties that normally have made war on each other and have generated a process where instead they all get together and try to make positive improvements. Public education is absolutely essential. You have a similar program here in Illinois. You're the third state in the nation to do that. You need to support them. In Ohio, we have what's called the Oil and Gas Energy Education Program. The executive director of that program has gone out and done over 260 presentations over just the past year trying to educate the public. And the public, as you can see from where you're sitting here today, is very hungry for this information, both from a local government standpoint, from citizens in general, the public interest, and certainly from the industry perspective. I wish you the best, and I hope it works out. Thank you very much.
You're watching the Illinois Channel.